Siri Hustvedt, April 21st, 2020, New York.
Hi, Siri Hustvedt.
Hello from Brooklyn to you in Paris.
How and what are you feeling today?
Well, it has been well over a month that my husband and I have been sequestered here in the house in Brooklyn. We were actually sick, both of us, in March for a while, not seriously ill. And at the time, we really didn't think we had the coronavirus, but our doctor seems to think we did have a not serious, mild case of the virus. I hope that's true because it might mean
Siri?
would have
It might.
immunity in the future. Yes?
I'm sorry.
It might immunity to the virus in the future.
Mm-hmm. You once told me that when we read, we can move mentally through time and space. Why is it even more true today?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the role of the imagination and reading during this time, because a book does not require social distancing, but one can feel very close to the consciousness of another person by reading.
And what about the philosopher Simone Weil? I also was thinking about her. I know you like her, and she said that most of our real life is composed by imagination and fiction. Do you have the impression that we all live in a middle of a corona fiction?
Well, it's a good question. Actually, Simone Weil was not so pleased with this truth. I think I have greater tolerance for the imagination. At the same time, I do think she was pointing out that many of our beliefs are driven by larger cultural fictions, or at least that's how I'm reading it. So there are good fictions and bad fictions. And among the bad fictions in the United States, anyway, I think have to do with, ironically, that isolated individuals can solve a problem like a pandemic alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
That are not all of us humans and connected to one another, and not only to one another, but to nature, right? To the whole, all the ecosystems around us.
You hear me?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly now.
Good.
Thank you. Do you
Good.
also have the impression of living in a fiction because you live in New York, this town full of people, full of life, full of noise, and suddenly it isn't anymore?
Well, I'm sure there are many people who have a sense that this is a kind of science fiction scenario. Certainly there have been any number of books that have played, and movies particularly, that have played with that idea. But you know, there are many precedents for pandemics in real history. And New York has been the victim, if you will, the city itself, of a number of pandemics. The biggest one being the 1918 flu pandemic that hit the city very hard, and actually hit it in similar ways to what we're witnessing now. Primarily the fact that wealthy people survive better than poor people. And another epidemic in 1795 that seized New York saw an exodus of rich people from the city. Then in 1918, And now in 2020, the story gets played out over and over again. It's really kind of tragic. Also, scientists predicted another pandemic. This is not a shocking event. It's something that epidemiologists had planned for and virologists knew was coming.
You're speaking about science, and neurosciences is one of your passions. What is the neurological effect of contentment?
Well, this is really complicated, but I think what's interesting me too is that there hasn't been, in the American press anyway, a kind of virus 101 lesson. Just what is a virus? And that's been mostly ignored as far as I can tell. A virus is a ubiquitous entity in the biosphere, right? They're just everywhere, including inside ourselves. So the human virome interacts with the microbiome, all the bacteria in us, in very important ways. Some of them are protective and some of them are damaging. And my favorite dispute in virology is whether a virus is alive or dead, because it's animated by its host, right? A virus actually, penetrates, its own genes penetrate our DNA, and they create a hybrid genome, which is a fascinating thing, right? And some of them are indeed killers. But it does also beg the question of borders, right? What is the other and what is the self? And I think that this is a really important question in biology. Where do we draw the lines? What's us and what's them, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that lesson I find to be profound, because it tells us that we can't draw these strict borders between us and them, between self and other, in the way that so many of our taxonomies, not only in science, but if you think about the world of politics, how all of that plays out. The dramas of purity, nativism, and the hatred that comes from that. When in fact we're deeply embedded in in the whole biological world, and it's very hard to create those distinctions.
Absolutely. And you speaking about what's going on in our body, there is another lesson that you learned a few years ago in your essay, The Shaking Women, or History of My Nerves, which is La Femme qui Tremble in French at Actes
Yes.
Sud. And there you explain how you lose control of your body. Is Corona reminding us of that we don't have control of our body and neither of our health?
I think, all illness makes people feel deeply vulnerable, right? All illness makes people feel that they are not in control of their destinies. Now, we really are not in control of our destinies in many, many ways, but that feeling of agency is something that people need. And I think The Shaking Women was also an investigation of how one can create a sense of agency even when you can't cure an illness, right? Mm-hmm. So chronic illnesses, asthma, there are many of them that don't necessarily kill people, but make one feel as if the illness has taken over, right? So one of the ways to create a sense of agency, even if you can't create a cure, is to make a narrative, right? To write the story yourself. Now, I have to say, people who are dying of coronavirus in New York, you know, the music of the city, the unsettling music of the city is siren music. The ambulances that you hear all day long. There are still over 600 people dying in the city every day. And because it has become so quiet, we hear the sirens more than we used to, because there are so few other sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, you know, someone who's on his or her way in an ambulance can be creating a restorative narrative, right? No.
In one of your other books, which is called Disillusions of Certainty, which is a title that is so that echoes so much what we are living now, it questions us also about our certainties and what are the certainties you have lost about life or about the US, the country, and the way it deals with that today.
You know, the pandemic is an enormous global event. But the way the pandemic is playing out in individual countries is also telling us a lot about those particular societies. Mm-hmm. And I think in the United States, we have seen all our wounds, if you will, all the things that are wrong with our society exposed more dramatically by the virus. So the terrible class boundaries, the racial boundaries, all of this is playing out before our eyes. And the fact that we have what I regard as a truly monstrous administration in power, an administration that has not taken responsibility for anything that is happening with the virus. We have heard one lie after another about the realities of testing, for example. It was downplayed. Speaking of fictions, you know, Donald Trump called the coronavirus their latest hoax, I guess referring to Democrats, although it wasn't clear. And a hoax is, well, an event that people believe to be real, but is in fact unreal. So the real has been turned upside down in this culture, and many more people are dying here. More people have died in the United States than anywhere else so far. I think that's highly revealing of how it's been mishandled. I have to say that I think a lot of governors in the United States are doing the best they can and doing a very good job. So we're lucky to have governors. But we have a really sad the president right now.
Siri, didn't understand your last sentence. We have a real sad.
We have a really sad example of a human being in the president's office right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, another of your books is called Living, Thinking, Looking. How would you love to live right now or tomorrow?
You know, I have to say that for a number of years, not my whole life, when I was younger, I thought more often about the future, and I think everyone needs an idea that there will be a future in order to live. You know, we're predictive beings. We're always leaning ahead. But I've noticed that I do not fantasize in my daily life about whatever is far ahead in the future so much anymore. I really do live in the immediate present. And I know that at the moment, this is what is. And I am trying to live it as best I can.
And your latest novel in French is called Memories of the Future, where you unite the past, the present, and the future.
Yes. Well, it's interesting to think about time and how time changes. I think for many people, time is running together because they don't have the routine that they generally have. Now, I work at home, so my life is not dramatically altered. What has changed is there are no meals in restaurants, and my company is my husband. That's it. I keep saying, I'm so glad we like each other, or it would be horrendous. So that is, of course, different. But I get up in the morning and write just as I usually do. And then I read and cook dinner every single night and watch a movie. But that is not so different from the routine that we usually have. We're extremely lucky. And our finances are about writing books, and that is also not dramatically altered, at least not at the moment. So we are marginal in many ways to the economic and medical dramas that are playing out around us.
Absolutely. I just want to remind people that your husband is Paul Auster, so they understand.
That's right. We're both writers. Yes. Yes. I am married to the writer Paul Auster, so we do the same thing every day.
Well,
at home.
in your face, obviously.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, Siri Hustvedt. It was a pleasure hearing you.
Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. And I have to say, I have never used Zoom before. And I realized I like it because it was nice to see a face that I'm not married to. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Siri. If it's a proposal, we leave it for the future, although you don't.
Yes, absolutely. That's right. You never know.
You never know.
We never know.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Kerenn.
I wish you
it was fun.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye-bye.